Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Project Pocket Monster, Rebalancing Pokemon Johto Part 3. Now, this is the series where we go through and we rebalance these old Pokemon that have been left by the wayside by Game Freak due to 24 years of power creep. If you don't know what power creep is, it's basically when new utilities or abilities are introduced and they make other ones, older ones, more irrelevant or completely not viable in a current competitive meta. Now, when we go through and we rebalance these Pokemon, there are a number of assumptions we need to make.
So first things first, we're not changing the type chart or type matchups. That means that fire is still super effective against grass, grass is still super effective against rock, and rock is still super effective against ice. All of that in vanilla Pokemon remains consistent in our rebalancing. We're not changing the effects of abilities. Instead, we're going to opt to change worse abilities for better abilities that still fit the Pokemon thematically. We're not going to change the base power, power points, or accuracy of any moves. That means we're not going to be giving something like Fire Spin 80 base power, Dynamic Punch 20 PP, or making Blizzard an 100% accurate move. All the moves are going to stay consistent as they are in vanilla Pokemon. Now, this is the most important assumption, is that these changes that we make have to fit thematically. So we're not going to be giving something like Quagsire the move Sacred Fire. Sure, it would be funny, but it doesn't make any sense. We're also not going to be giving a Pokemon like Charizard an ability like Storm Drain, because that just doesn't line up with what Charizard is, or how he's ever functioned in any games or lore. Now, keep in mind, guys, this is also a meta without Mega Evolution, Z-moves, or Dynamaxing/Gigantamaxing, so we're not going to be creating Mega Evolutions, creating custom Z-moves, nor including Dynamaxing/Gigantamaxing in our rebalancing. It is just the base Pokemon. So remember, guys, if you enjoy the content, be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And without further ado, let's get started.
Now, last time we left off with Lantern, and this time we are going to be starting off with Xatu. Now, Xatu is actually by all means a pretty decent Pokemon, especially in Sword and Shield. It has a pretty decent defensive typing in Psychic Flying, as well as a very coveted ability in Magic Bounce. Both Synchronize and Early Bird are okay abilities, Early Bird obviously being the worst of the two, but Magic Bounce is really what makes Xatu thrive as it is. Right now in Sword and Shield, Xatu's actually NU due to its speed, its special attack, its access to Magic Bounce, pivoting, just being able to deter a enemy from setting up sticky webs, stealth rocks, spikes, bouncing back statuses, taunt, that sort of thing. Xatu is sort of a go-to pivot when it comes to certain defensive hazard setters or setup support Pokemon. And actually, you know what? Xatu's pretty okay. So that's why I don't feel the need to change Xatu all too much. Of the Magic Bounce users that exist, however, Xatu is probably far and away the worst, I would say. Right now, it's only Mega Sableye, Mega Absol, and once again, this meta does not include Mega Pokemon. So it really only boils down to it being Xatu, Espeon, and Hatterene as the only Magic Bouncers currently in this rebalanced version of the game. So, that being said, Xatu, of those three, is far and away, I think, the worst, despite the fact that it is a sort of defensive pivot as well as a support Pokemon. Xatu's defenses are kind of not so great. 65 HP as well as 70 defense and 70 special defense is not very good. Xatu can kind of be worn down pretty quickly from neutral hits. Can't really take a knockoff. Usually it's either running like heavy duty booties or a Colbur Berry, something along those lines to be able to make it stick around. Usually Xatu's forced to run like U-Turn, Roost. There is a Cosmic Power Stored Power set out there. Obviously Magic Bounce helps Xatu be able to set up and not actually get worn down over time. But all in all, Xatu is indeed pretty frail. So there's actually only really one thing I want to do for Xatu, and that is increase its defense by 20 whole points. Xatu is said to be an unflinching, unmoving totem that just stares at the sun all day, so I think it makes sense for it to be a little bit sturdier than it previously was. This 90 defense allows it to not only maybe take a knockoff a little bit better, but just basically sponge physical hits a little bit better. Definitely can switch into fighting type attacks as is, but with 20 more points into its defense, it can actually switch into neutral hits, as well as honestly take these fighting type hits even a little bit better. It can take rock slides a little bit better, and that sort of thing. It actually lets Xatu stick around further throughout the course of a match and not be worn down as hard, and I think that's actually really important important when it comes to a pivot support Pokemon like Xatu is. I'm actually not going to be touching Xatu's abilities in general. Once again, I said that Magic Bounce is a really good ability. Synchronize is actually okay if you want to catch your opponent off guard. Obviously, you're probably not going to be running Early Bird, but I don't feel the need to change these other abilities just because you're going to be running Magic Bounce pretty much 100% of the time. Now, as far as Xatu's moves go, this is really where we get into the stuff that's going to make this buffed Xatu just a little bit better. So right off the bat, I want to give Xatu access to Mirror Coat as well as Oblivion Wing. I realize that it's included in the same type attack boost category. Obviously, you're not going to get a multiplier from Mirror Coat, but it is a psychic type. It is an attacking move technically, so that's where I decided to stick it. Mirror Coat lets Xatu potentially hit back against Thunderbolts, Ice Beams if it happens to live one, and potentially take something out. I also wanted to give Xatu Oblivion Wing. Now, Oblivion Wing is previously the signature move of Yveltal, and it basically is a flying type Giga Drain. Now, this lets Xatu have a sort of reliable recovery on top of having a same type attack boosted move, all in one move slot. So this frees Xatu up to run another support option, maybe a Tailwind, maybe a Toxic, because Xatu previously has basically had 4 move slot syndrome, and now basically combining Roost and Air Slash or Hurricane, it actually makes Xatu quite a bit better. I don't feel the need to give Xatu any really coverage moves. Obviously, it gets Heat Wave, it gets Giga Drain, I believe, it gets Shadow Ball. Xatu's actually pretty solid on that front. But for setup and support, I want to give Xatu a couple of different options. Now, I want to give Xatu Barrier, Amnesia, Miracle Eye, Lunar Dance, Psychic Terrain, and Morning Sun. Barrier and Amnesia give Xatu the ability to potentially set up. This helps it out as a setup sweeper. As I mentioned, that it does have a Calm Mind stored power set as well as a Cosmic Power stored power set. This gives you another option to run in case you really want to boost your special defense. Being able to sit in their face, Amnesia maybe, take an Ice Beam, Oblivion Wing it back up, Roost back up, and then kind of just snowball out of control from there. That's something that Xatu can do now. Even though it only has base 65 HP and base 70 special defense, the base 90 defense is going to help it in that regard. I wanted to give Xatu Lunar Dance because, once again, it's kind of a support option, a very unique one. Basically, Lunar Dance is Healing Wish. It used to be the signature move of Cresselia, and I just want Xatu to be able to, after it's done doing its thing, if it's on its last legs, be able to Lunar Dance and potentially heal something up at the very tail end of the game. Because we combined Roost as well as Air Slash, this means that Xatu basically has a move slot for something like Lunar Dance, and I think that it could go a long ways of helping it. I wanted to give it Psychic Terrain because I feel like the dispersal of the terrain moves is not nearly wide enough as it should be. So obviously Xatu makes sense. It's a psychic type, psychic terrain. That just sort of makes sense to me. And I also wanted to give it Morning Sun because, as it said, Xatu does indeed stare at the sun for basically the entire day. And it also gives Xatu an option to recover that doesn't make it lose its flying typing, so it lets it check ground types more effectively. Sure, it has less PP than Roost, but it is a different option in case you feel like you're not going to be PP stalling anything. If you don't feel the need to have, 24 roosts or 16 roosts or however many roosts that you get when I actually have no idea. Maybe I should look it up. But either way, Morning Sun gives Xatu a third recovery option besides Oblivion Wing and besides Roosts, and it actually lends some diversity to Xatu's kit. Now, I already kind of thought that Xatu was a pretty decent Pokemon, but I think that these changes actually do a decent amount to help Xatu compete with fellow Magic Bouncers like Hatterene and Espeon, as well as separate itself from them in that regard. This brings us to a Generation 2 staple, a fan favorite of a Pokemon in Ampharos. Now, Ampharos, while it may be a very reliable Pokemon for your average Generation 2 playthrough, due to its pretty decent stats, its good bulk, as well as its ability to potentially hit hard with super effective electric-type attacks, in the competitive scene, Ampharos has not seen as much luck. Unfortunately, usually when you think of an electric type that's an offensive threat, you think of faster electric types that hit even a decent amount harder than Ampharos does. Over the course of the last 20 years, obviously we've seen electric types start to increase their base stats in general. I think notably, Zorora, I think of Vikavolt having 30 more base special attack than Ampharos, as well as support options in like Sticky Web. Notably, Ampharos just cannot keep up with the meta. Having a defensive electric type as well as a slow electric type is not something that is very desirable for a team. Most electric types are supposed to be fast, they're supposed to hit hard, hard, they're supposed to pivot, and unfortunately Ampharos does not have the tools required to really do that effectively. On top of that, it doesn't have access to a reliable recovery move, as well as nothing that it can really use to set up very effectively. So all in all, Ampharos is pretty outclassed in what it does, on top of not having very good abilities either. Ampharos needs a decent amount of work in order to make him work as a more defensive electric type, something that we don't see all too often. Now, I want to maintain that archetype that Ampharos has as a defensive electric type. So right off the bat, I'd actually like to start with Ampharos' stats. I want to actually subtract 10 from its attack stat and put 10 into its special attack stat, beefing it up to a special attack stat of 125, as well as dump an additional 10 points into its speed, putting it at a base speed of 65. Now this does a couple of things for Ampharos. One, obviously we did not buff its actual defenses itself, but being able to hit a bit harder with Volt Switch, as well as Thunderbolt and different kinds of coverage moves, goes a pretty decent way for Ampharos. 125 is much more respectable than 115 is, as well as 10 more points into its speed really makes a huge difference for Ampharos. Base 55's obviously getting outsped by base 60s. Putting it at base 65 actually lets it outspeed base 60s, as well as it potentially being able to run a Choice Scarf. Being able to outspeed way more Pokemon with the Choice Scarf actually helps Ampharos a decent amount. Usually you're not going to be wanting to Choice Scarf your electric type, but there's going to be a couple different ways we build Ampharos, as well as a couple different sets that Ampharos will be able to run by the end of this rebalance. Obviously being faster and hitting harder is better for an electric type than being slower and weaker. But really the big changes are going to come with its abilities as well as its move pool. So starting right off the bat with Static. Static is all in all a pretty decent ability for Ampharos. Static makes sense. It was a sheep, it had wool. Static gives a 30% chance for Ampharos to paralyze a opponent who comes in contact with him, or rather makes contact with him, slowing the opponent down, paralyzing them, as well as letting Ampharos maybe hit it on the next turn first. But plus, ain't so great of an ability. Obviously, Ampharos is probably never ever going to run Plus. Plus is only effective in doubles, and even then you have to be paired with another electric or steel type in order to even make it work. Honestly, the negatives of Plus are such a downside compared to the positives. It's almost never ever worth running Plus, so we're going to be getting rid of Plus for Cotton Down. Now, Cotton Down is the signature ability of Gossifleur and Eldegoss in Generation 8. What Cotton Down does is basically when Ampharos gets hit by a physical move, it releases Cotton and slows down the opposing Pokemon by one stage. This lets Ampharos potentially come in, sponge a hit, and slow down the opponent, as well as maybe even be able to outspeed the opponent on the next turn, potentially, either heal up, pivot out, as well as maybe even revenge kill it if the opponent is at a low enough HP percentage. And I also wanted to give Ampharos access to Cloud9. Now, why Cloud9? Well, Ampharos previously in the games has been the lighthouse, the beacon of light for the sailors of Cianwood and Olivine City, being able to clear the effects of weather, being rain, sand, sun, and hail, actually makes sense thematically for Ampharos. Obviously, its tail is like a guidepost to those kinds of people. Being able to eliminate Swift Swim Sweepers, Chlorophyll Sweepers, as well as the tick damage from hail and sand, puts Ampharos in a pretty unique position. Cloud9 itself is a very unique ability regardless, but being on an electric type actually gives Ampharos a sort of niche as a sort of weather style of play counter, and I think it actually makes Ampharos a decent amount interesting. You're probably going to be running Static or Cotton Down if you're planning to play Ampharos as a defensive pivot, but where Ampharos is really going to shine is in its moveset that we're going to give it. So, right off the bat, as far as same type attack boosted moves, I want to give Ampharos access just to Nuzzle. Now, what Nuzzle does, it's a physical move, but it's a guaranteed paralysis. This means that Ampharos, if it's running T-Wave, it can't even be taunted because Nuzzle is actually an attack move, so it'll obviously be able to get off. I want to give Ampharos coverage in Luster Purge, Flash Cannon, and Terrain Pulse. Again, Luster Purge and Flash Cannon are two moves that directly have to do with light, and I think it makes sense for Ampharos to be able to use these moves. Having a Psychic type and a Steel type coverage moves lets Ampharos hit fighting types, as well as potentially rock types and fairy types, as well as Terrain Pulse. Maybe lets Ampharos take advantage of a certain terrain, whether you're in grassy terrain, whether you're in misty terrain. It's going to help Ampharos' coverage out a decent amount if you decide to run Ampharos on a terrain team. This is where the big changes come into play. As far as setup and support moves, I want to give Ampharos access to two of the best moves in the game, as far as Tail Glow and Defog, as well as access to Milk Drink. Now that's the big thing that makes Ampharos much better than it previously was. Having access to a reliable source of recovery is super duper important when it comes to sticking around throughout a match. As a defensive pivot like Ampharos is sort of designed to be, with its decent defenses as 90 HP, 75 defense, and 90 special defense. If a Pokemon decides to use a physical move, Ampharos comes in, maybe sponges it, is able to Milk Drink it off, slow the opponent down, maybe even paralyze it, as well as then it gets the opportunity to do something from there. What it can do, potentially, is hit an opponent with a coverage move, Luster Purge, Flash Cannon, Discharge, Signal Beam, you name it. You can potentially, get rid of hazards or screens with Defog. Honestly, I don't know why Ampharos doesn't have Defog. We spoke about it when we talked about Lantern last time. These electric types that illuminate light, it surprises me to no end that they did not gain access to Defog in Generation 4 through 8. Defog actually makes perfect sense for Ampharos. Tail Glow, on top of that, is just, it's obvious. Xurkitree gets Tail Glow, Manaphy gets Tail Glow, Volbeat gets Tail Glow. How come Ampharos, with the literal brightest tail in the entire game, doesn't get Tail Glow? I will never know. But what Tail Glow does is it absolutely turns Ampharos into a setup beast. Tail Glow with a combination of maybe Milk Drink, Thunderbolt, and then some sort of coverage move in either Flash Cannon, Luster Purge, Signal Beam, really go a long way to making Ampharos a absolute beast of a special attacker. This means that Ampharos has the ability to actually set up on opposing teams and separates itself from the other electric types that are able to do so. I think that all of these tools we've given Ampharos give it a decent variety of sets that it's able to run. You can run a Choice Scarf set, you can run a decent slow pivoting set, maybe even an Assault Vest set. Being able to come in, slow something down with Cotton Down, or paralyze them with Static, potentially set up in their face, set up screens, heal off status with Heal Bell, set up in their face with Tail Glow, and potentially heal off all the damage you take with Milk Drink. There's a lot of things that Ampharos can do now, and I think it actually separates Ampharos from a number of other electric types that would ordinarily have competed with it for a spot on your competitive team. Which brings us to Bellossom. Now, Bellossom is basically just worse Vileplume. Just having a grass typing is nothing incredible. Starting right off the bat with how Bellossom's stats are, obviously 75, 95, 100 on the defensive side's actually pretty solid. 50 speed is obviously pretty bad. 90 special attack and 80 attack are indeed pretty middling. But in general, Bellossom finds itself not having a lot of use compared to other grass types. You think of good grass type Pokemon, you think of Moongus, you think of Tangrowth, you think of Ferrothorn, you think of Kartana, much more offensively or defensively oriented. Bellossom finds itself pretty much square in the middle. Having its only abilities be Chlorophyll and Healer aren't very solid. Being a Chlorophyll sweeper with only base 50 speed means that it's going to be outsped by Venusaur, by Shiftry, by Victory Bell, pretty much everything that's going to want to Chlorophyll sweep, as well as not having the additional poison typing or a dark typing in Shiftry's case, means that Bellossom is indeed outclassed by pretty much everything that wants to do it. So I propose that we differentiate Bellossom in some way. Now, we're actually not going to be touching Bellossom's stats at all. I think that Bellossom, while it has middling stats, what we're going to be doing for it as far as its abilities and moves go is going to be enough so it actually has some traction here. Now, as far as its abilities go, I want to keep Chlorophyll. As I mentioned, it's not exactly a great Chlorophyll sweeper, but it is indeed associated with the sun. I think it makes sense thematically, and there's actually a few abilities that I think I want to give Bellossom instead. So, as you can see, Healer has been replaced with Dancer. Now, Bellossom, very known for its hula dances. It literally has a hula skirt. Look at its arms. It's doing the thing. Dancer is the signature ability of Oricorio in Generation 7. It basically just copies an opponent's dance moves. So if a Pokemon goes for Swords Dance, Dragon Dance, Lunar Dance, anything really with dance in its name, Bellossom is going to be able to use that move as well. So that means that Bellossom can potentially get a free Swords Dance boost, a free Quiver Dance boost, a free Dragon Dance boost, that sort of thing. It's not exactly the most ideal ability, and it relies on an opponent, but not only is it thematic, it can also turn Bellossom into a decent setup sweeper without really even having to do anything. But the most notable ability that I'm going to be giving Bellossom is indeed Drought. Now, I know what you're thinking, Drought on a grass type. How does that make any sense? So many of Bellossom's Pokédex entries refer to Bellossom as gathering in groups to be able to perform a dance and summon the sun. Now, I think that Drought makes Bellossom a very, very unique Pokemon. The only other Pokemon with access to Drought are Torkoal, Ninetales, and Groudon. Groudon obviously being a ground type, and Torkoal and Ninetales both being fire types. This makes Bellossom the only grass type with Drought, and that in itself lends Bellossom to getting much more use as a weather setter. Sun is probably the worst weather alongside Hail. It's arguable as to which one's actually worse in Generation 8, because Hail, obviously you can run Aurora Veil strats if you really want to, but Bellossom now with Drought means that it can actually support its team in an entirely different way. You're not forced to run 2 different fire types if you want to capitalize off of fire types, and you can also run 2 different grass types if you want to have a Pokemon like Victory Bell or Venusaur be supported by Bellossom. You can do that as well. Setting up Sun on entry is really, really important, and actually makes Bellossom one of the best answers to a rain team. Not only do you shut down the rain, you can also hit hard with same type attack boosted moves. You can shut down Kabutops, you can shut down Ludicolo. Obviously your special defense is pretty good, so you can come in, eat a water type attack, especially one that's been diminished by the sun that you set, and then you can fire back with some same type attack boosted move, or you can potentially set up. So I actually only want to give Bellossom a couple of moves that I think will actually go a decent ways to help it. Right off the bat, I'm not going to be giving Bellossom any same type attack boosted moves. I think that Bellossom actually gets a pretty decent number of moves, as well as, kind of doesn't really need anything else in its kit besides the other 2 things we're going to be giving it. As far as coverage moves, I want to be giving it Fiery Dance. Now, Fiery Dance, it's previously the signature move of Volcarona. It's a 80 base power fire type move that has a 50% chance to increase the user's special attack stat. And I also want to be giving Bellossom Morning Sun. So there you go. There are all the tools that Bellossom has. Let's talk about what Bellossom can potentially do with them. So Drought is obviously the go-to ability with Bellossom. It potentially lets you come in, stop rain sweepers, stop sand sweepers, stop even hail sweepers if you really want to. Notably rain's obviously the best weather, and sun pretty much fizzles out a bunch of water type attacks that might be wanting to throw in Bellossom's. That's why I didn't feel the need to buff Bellossom's stats at all, because it already has pretty decent special defense as well as special attack, and I think that it actually would make Bellossom a little too good if we were to buff its stats to the point of having this crazy amount of setup and support that it can do. So Bellossom not only has access already to 2 of the best moves in the game with Strength Sap and Quiver Dance, with a combination of Drought and Giga Drain and Fiery Dance, turns Bellossom into a super duper good setup sweeper. Bellossom can come in on a rain team, or come in on anything it can eat a hit from, set up the sun, and immediately start boosting with Quiver Dance. After 1 Quiver Dance, Bellossom can Giga Drain its health back. It can Fiery Dance to potentially get another boosted attack, sitting at +2 special attack, +1 special defense, and +1 speed is going to be very, very hard to stop Bellossom, as well as having access to Strength Sap, giving it some sort of reliable recovery. On top of that, it already gets access to Morning Sun, it gets access to Synthesis. That means that Bellossom's able to stay healthy as it tries to set up. Sure, Bellossom can still be shut down by certain things like Taunt, Toxic, even something like Torment, but honestly this makes Bellossom a very fearsome setup sweeper and actually separates it from a lot of the other grass types it might be competing for a team slot with. This turns Bellossom into a pseudo Volcarona sort of thing, having access to both Giga Drain and Fiery Dance on top of Quiver Dance, on top of Strength Sap. That's probably going to be the go-to set. It may be a little one note, but it actually turns Bellossom into a fearsome setup sweeper. That coverage actually goes a very long way for it, a fire type move. I think that Bellossom really only needed a couple tools tools to increase its niche, and being the only grass type with drought, as well as having access to one of the best setup moves in the entire game, one of the best recovery moves in the entire game, actually puts Bellossom on the map as far as a setup sweeper, as well as a support Pokemon for other teams, notably Sun teams, but it can even go a little bit farther than that if you're willing to push Bellossom's potential. This brings us to Azumarill. Now, Azumarill is one of the very few Pokemon over the course of its lifespan actually got a decent amount better. In Gold and Silver, it actually started out in NU, but over the course of generation to generation, it was able to keep up with the power creep. In Ruby and Sapphire, Generation 3, it got Huge Power and Thick Fat, two very, very good abilities. Huge Power, obviously doubling its attack stat in general, making it actually a physical beast. In Diamond and Pearl, the physical special split unleashed, so it was able to actually have boosting water type moves in Waterfall and that sort of thing. In Generation 5, it got Sap Sipper, meaning that it potentially has an immunity to grass type attacks. You could still run a Belly Drum Sap Sipper set. While not as common as a Belly Drum Huge Power set, it is a decent buff for Azumarill. In Generation 6, Azumarill was given the Fairy type as well as Play Rough and Knockoff, meaning that Azumarill actually has a whole bunch of different options: Aqua Jet, Waterfall, Liquidation, Play Rough, Knockoff, Belly Drum, Citrus Berry, just a number of sets that Azumarill is able to run. It's been consistently good throughout the previous few generations. Azumarill is one of the few instances that a Pokemon has been consistently buffed by Game Freak, and actually, in that sense, we are not going to be touching Azumarill. Water Fairy is a fantastic offensive and defensive typing, has a phenomenal ability in Huge Power, and even good abilities in Sap Sipper and Thick Fat. It's got priority in Aqua Jet, it's got setup in Belly Drum, and honestly, Azumarill is just a super fantastic Pokemon. And that makes me very, very happy to see a Generation 2 Pokemon that has withstood the test of time, and not only withstood it, but rose to the occasion over the test of time. So kudos to you, Azumarill. You've done phenomenal during these absolute crazy 2 decades of power creep. Good job. And finally, this brings us to Sudowoodo, one of my personal favorite Generation 2 Pokemon. Now, Sudowoodo has been previously not super great. Its attack stat's 100, its defense stat is 115, but besides that, it really doesn't have a ton going for it. It obviously gets access to Rock Head and Sturdy. It has access to Rock Head Head Smash, which, while it sounds like a pretty decent combination, it's actually outclassed by a ton of other Pokemon that also have access to Rock Head Head Smash that are not only faster, but hit much harder than Sudowoodo, or have different setup abilities that Sudowoodo does not have. So Sudowoodo has fallen by the wayside 100% of the time when it comes to offensive rock types. It's very slow, it's not super strong, it doesn't have great special bulk. There's a bunch of things that Sudowoodo does not have going for it when it comes time to picking a rock type for your team. Rock in itself is not a very good defensive typing, which honestly is kind of hilarious, but it's actually true, and kind of needs to be paired with something in order to actually make something of itself defensively. But there are a number of things that I'd like to do to Sudowoodo to actually help it out in the current metagame. So starting right off the bat, Sudowoodo had a base stat total of 410, which is actually very, very pitiful. That falls along the lines of, Charmeleon, Wartortle, those middle evolution starters. Its attack and defense are pretty solid, but it really doesn't have very good stats outside of that. So I want to add 10 points to Sudowoodo's special defense and 25 points to its speed. Now, I know what you're thinking. That actually doesn't bring Sudowoodo's base stat total up a ton. It brings it from 410 to 445. But what this does for Sudowoodo is it actually increases its special bulk a decent amount, as well as lets it outspeed certain other Rock Head Smash users that might have wanted to take its place on a team. But really where the big change for Sudowoodo is going to come from is actually in its abilities. So, Sturdy, fantastic ability. Being able to live a hit on 1 HP from full, very, very good. It lets it set up rocks. It lets it potentially get a boost up in Swords Dance, something like that. Rockhead Head Smash, as I expressed, is a pretty decent set regardless. With a boosted speed stat, it actually means that Sudowoodo is able to maybe even run something like a Choice Scarf, albeit it's not going to be very fast even with the Choice Scarf, but it is indeed something that you could bring to a battle. The biggest change that we're going to be making to Sudowoodo is going to be replacing Rattled with Disguise. Now, what is Disguise? You might not even know what that ability does, but that's okay. Disguise is the signature ability of Mimikyu, and what Disguise does is it acts as a sort of pseudo substitute for Sudowoodo right off the bat. So Sudowoodo, when it comes into battle, it'll then be in its disguised form. What this means is that Sudowoodo is able to take one hit that does 12% and is able to do basically whatever it wants before its disguise is busted. It is a single-use substitute for this Pokemon. Now, why does Disguise make sense for Sudowoodo? I shouldn't even have to describe why it makes sense, but I'm going to anyway. Its name is Sudowoodo. It is Sudowwood. In Generation 2, it serves as a roadblock, as a weird tree. It's literally in disguise, and I think that this makes Sudowoodo not only very, very unique as a Pokemon, it fits thematically. It's actually one of my personal favorite changes that I've made over the course of this entire Rebalancing Pokemon series, and it actually opens the doors up for Sudowoodo to be relatively good. So, on top of Disguise, I want to give Sudowoodo access to a number of different moves. So, right off the bat, same type attack boosted moves. I want to give Sudowoodo just Excel Rock. It already gets Rock Tomb, it already gets Rock Slide, it already gets Stone Edge, it already gets Head Smash. What is it missing? It's missing some form of priority in Excel Rock. Now, Excel Rock is previously a signature move of Lycanroc. I think that I've been pretty hesitant to give Excel Rock to other rock types. I think I only gave it to Golem, but I think that it actually helped Sudowoodo's kit out a lot. As far as coverage moves, I want to give Sudowoodo access to Power Up Punch, Knock Off, and Throat Chop. A couple dark type attacks, knockoff obviously being the best of those three moves, means that Sudowoodo is able to knock off an opponent's item while it may have a disguise boost up, while it may have a sturdy still intact, and it actually helps Sudowoodo as far as coverage a decent amount as well. Now this part surprised me, is that Sudowoodo actually did not previously have access to Swords Dance. A bunch of Pokemon have access to Swords Dance. Notably, we just talked about Bellossom. Bellossom already had access to Swords Dance. Sudowoodo, unfortunately, does not. As a physical attacker, it surprises me, actually, that Sudowoodo does not have access to Swords Dance, but now it does, as well as Obstruct. Obstruct being the signature move of Obstagoon. It basically lowers an opponent's defense by -2 if it tries to attack Sudowoodo physically, and this actually acts as sort of a pseudo Swords Dance boost for Sudowoodo, letting it hit potentially a little bit harder, as well as providing it opportunities to protect and potentially maintain its disguise on physical attackers. Now, this leads to a couple of different powerful sets that Sudowoodo can opt to run. Having access to Disguise or Sturdy means that you can run Sudowoodo as a guaranteed Stealth Rock lead, being able to potentially take a hit with Sturdy or Disguise, guaranteed get up rocks, and then be able to hit back with either Priority in Excel Rock or Sucker Punch. Two really big things for Sudowoodo. If you want to run a Rockhead Head Smash Choice Scarf set, it actually works a little bit better due to Sudowoodo's boosted speed. If you want to run Sudowoodo like Mimikyu, if you want to run a Swords Dance, Excel Rock, Disguise set with knockoff and maybe even Power Up Punch or Brick Break or something along those lines as far as coverage moves, you're more than welcome to do that as well. This gives Sudowoodo actually an ability to have a presence on the field and not just get mowed down by super effective hits due to its mediocre bulk. That's why I didn't feel the need to buff Sudowoodo's stats entirely, because Disguise is such a very good ability and turns a Pokemon like Mimikyu into probably a middling threat into a very powerful threat, assuming it's able to get up a couple of boosts in Swords Dance. Disguise and Stealth Rocks is notably probably my favorite way to run this, especially with Swords Dance and Excel Rock, but you can feel free to run Sudowoodo however you see fit. I think that this not only is very thematic for Sudowoodo, but makes Sudowoodo not only unique when it comes to other offensive rock types like Aerodactyl, Aggron, Archeops, or even special attackers like Nihilego, or even Lycanroc. Disguise gives Sudowoodo a niche over those Pokemon, and actually turns Sudowoodo into a very fun Pokemon. So, that all being said, that is it for this round of Rebalancing Pokemon. We covered a few Pokemon, a Drought Bellossom, a Disguise Sudowoodo, a boosted Xatu, as well as a milk-drinking defensive Ampharos. If you guys enjoy the content, you already know what to do. Be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Keep in mind, guys, that these videos are always for fun. Feel free to let me know how I did in the comments, as well as potentially your own suggestions for how you would rebalance these Pokemon. I love the discussion that it spawns. I love the theory crafting and that sort of thing. Anyway, guys, I'm gonna get out of here. Thank you all for watching. I'll catch you all in the next one. Till